Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to cover the topic of emotional triggers and cravings as it relates to addiction. I have Jocelyn King-DeLay here with me today. I would like to welcome her, and we're going to pick her brain. She works at a treatment center and comes with extensive experience with alcohol, drug, as well as mental health disorders. So thank you for being here, Jocelyn. Glad that you made the time to come and join me today. So I am going to pick your brain. So I'm going to turn it to you.
It's amazing how so often people who really don't know about addiction think that it's rooted in a person liking the taste of a particular alcohol, or they enjoy the feeling, or they're doing it because they're irresponsible, or they're doing it just because they have poor character. But that is not the case. Very often, addiction is tied to an emotional trigger.
There are 13 emotional triggers that we're going to cover today. And I had one on the top of the list, which I think is one of the most intense emotion that a person feels that actually triggers. It's a trigger, and it takes them into a drinking, and that sense of deprivation and boredom, loneliness, loss or death in the family. Jocelyn, you want to add to those?
Yes, relationship breakups, empty nest syndrome, a feeling that you no longer have purpose if the children have left, or if you're an individual who, over a period of time of working in a job that they may have hated, feel like they have no purpose. And retirement can be a trigger too in itself, just retirement.
Right. And you also were talking something about body image, and that you're seeing a lot of that in the treatment program that you are working with.
Yes, body image issues have increased in occurrence nationally and possibly internationally, but for sure nationally. Social media plays a huge role in body image issues, or a person's self-esteem or self-concept. And if someone feels like they are less than, they may become anxious or experience depression or have a form of social anxiety to the point where they feel like the only way they can function is through an altered state, which would happen through drinking alcohol or using drugs.
Right. And then how about lack of social support? Lack
Absolutely.
of family support, and then social media.
Absolutely. So the lack of social support, at least sober social support, is key. If someone is in recovery, it's very important for them to attend meetings, to obtain a sponsor, to increase their sober connection of individuals and friends. It's very important. Some people have difficulty with isolation, and if someone has issues with isolation, it's important for someone in recovery to increase their sober support network. It's very important. Some people can do well by themselves, but most people do better when they have sober support. And I will not say that it's only through meetings that individuals can have sober social support, but that is a way to go about achieving it, is to go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, obtain a sponsor, develop that sober network. In addition, for people who are involved in their own religion, that can be part of their sober support network and increase their connections. Connection is very important when it comes to recovery. Lack of connection is definitely a part of active use.
When there is a breakup, and I want to come back to the breakup, when there's a breakup in a relationship, whether it could be divorce, separation, but breakup, a lot of times the attachment styles kick in. And if you've had insecure attachment, you are going to either be anxious, avoidant, and avoidant especially is when they flight and freeze, because they have difficulty with emotions. They cannot handle feelings. and so use alcohol, drugs, or even binge eating or purging. And yeah, and if you have dysfunctional family system that you belong to, where there's trauma bonding, there's gaslighting, that also can be a trigger. You know, a lot of times people don't understand that the craving is physical. You know, there are emotional triggers, but then there's these cravings which are physical. That means that you are dependent. And so because the brain has gotten addicted to it. Well, how is that? Because the brain is now not producing dopamine, because now it's because the person is doing the drug frequently, and so the brain is believing that it's producing too much dopamine, and the dopamine actually is produced in the kidneys. So the brain says, oh, too much dopamine, we need to stop. I need to stop the production of dopamine. And so now your body is not producing dopamine. And that's when people have those, they have these body aches. They have to have the alcohol to feel good, to feel motivated. And so the physical cravings, when you start to have physical cravings, you need to pay attention to what's happening with your body, because now you're on a very slippery slope.
Yes, of course, an individual could, if they choose to come to treatment, could arrive with withdrawal symptoms. Mm-hmm. And we typically call those post-acute withdrawal symptoms.
Right.
It could be physiological and emotional.
Yeah.
There could be all types of physiological reactions to the body craving or needing what had been consumed, any mind or mood altering substance that had been consumed, and the body recognizes that it's not getting it anymore.
Yeah.
So then have the withdrawal symptoms. In addition, emotionally, the person has been affected by having an altered mind from the substance, and now that substance is missing. So there's emotional, brain, physiological. All of these issues come into play when someone is trying to recover initially. Eventually, with medical monitoring, appropriate vitamins, exercise, healthy eating, healthy activity, those withdrawal symptoms can eventually dissipate and go away. But during active addiction is when a buildup of these symptoms will be occurring, because the body will develop tolerance. And once that tolerance is built, then more has to be taken in order to get the feeling. So
exactly.
Of course, over time, the body's going to become very used to it.
Yeah.
And when it's just gone all of a sudden, it kind of screams out for that to be re-entered into the system. Right. Furthermore, I guess moving away from the physiological issues, I'm also thinking about trauma. And if an individual has learned to manage their trauma with drugs and alcohol, or even with excessive shopping. Now, of course, with shopping addiction and gambling addiction, there's less of a likelihood of physiological reactions, but there are definitely emotional reactions and social reactions. Mm-hmm. There's so many issues that come into play when you're talking about self-medicating trauma, but typically it's through substances, either drugs or alcohol. And during those times, individuals want to stop thinking about and dreaming about their trauma.
Yes.
And in some cases, drugs and alcohol may seem to help with that. It's a falsehood, and it may take the edge off of the feeling, or if someone drinks to the point where they, quote unquote, black out, then they may not feel it, and they may not think about it. But a person cannot function in everyday life healthily, in a healthy manner, obviously when they are blacked out from drugs or alcohol. Issues of trauma are coming up more and more in our society.
I want to just talk a little bit about that, because that is one thing that, in addition to attachment styles, the trauma is the emotions that the body had produced when one was going through the traumatic experiences. Those are the ones that get triggered because there is something that, through your five senses, one of your five senses, or maybe two of your five senses, it picked up on something that's happening in the present moment that triggered those feelings that actually they belong to the trauma from the past.
Yes.
Most of the time, people have such a hard time managing those emotions, or actually even dealing with those emotions. And so what they do is they go ahead and start drinking or do their addiction and not work on what they really need to do. And that is to identify and stay with those feelings and actually acknowledge them and
Yes.
release them, rather than going in the past, staying right there with the feelings. And the way you do that is you bring yourself back into the present moment and remind yourself that I'm safe. Nothing bad is
Yes.
happening to me. I am okay. And that brings you to the present moment. And then you can work through the trauma, rather than going into the past and then finding something to suppress or repress those emotions, or freeze those emotions. It's better to actually acknowledge them and identify them and hopefully release them.
And that can be, not always, but one of the two methods that I find have been fairly effective for individuals who are open to it would be mindfulness practices and meditation.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to come back to that. Let's go ahead and wrap this up for right now, and we're going to come back again. Thank you so much for being here, Jocelyn. We're going to continue this in another session. Please leave a comment or two if you find this video to be helpful. Would love to hear from you, and wishing you the best.